Good morning, class. It's early morning, 6 o'clock, right? Sorry, midnight 6, right? Good. On the first hand, I would like to congratulate that you have taken a decision of joining HIR, right? Because इसमें तो impact पक्का, इसलिए the name is high impact revision, right? Now, the first 5 days of these sessions we are going to have polity, followed by geography, and today's session is fundamentally going to be initial half an hour. We would see that what is going to be the modus operandi of these sessions for next 40 days, right? I think we're going to travel for 40 days continuously. Roju meer nannu chudal, nenu mimmalni chudal, right? With that consideration, we'll have to fundamentally keep a framework for these sessions which are going to be conducted and which are going to be going on. Now, when you look at the modus operandi of these sessions, when you look at the modus operandi of these sessions, the fundamental understanding of these sessions are: one, to arrive at conceptual clarity, one purpose. I mean, what do you expect from these sessions? The second thing that you can expect from these sessions is consolidations. That what you fundamentally have to understand is prelims is not a game of volume of content. Prelims is a game of strategizing the right content. Because I always keep using one particular word in most of my sessions. I think most of you are my previous students. You would see that there is something called as exam oriented content. And in all of these sessions, we are definitely going to emphasize on something called as exam oriented content. And we look at consolidation of those exam oriented content, and finally we would land up with roughly around 250 to 300 pages of notes for all the GS that we have. That is for your polity, for your geography, for your history, for your economy, for your S&T, for your environment, including your current affairs. Because we will see current affairs sessions to be towards the fag end of your May, roughly between, I think, May 12th or something, right? You would see that for all of this, we would consolidate every content which is required for examination within the notes of 250 to 300 pages. That means 1 week before examination, I know what to read and what should be read is only this. Without any doubt that I would claim for this, for the reason that I think you would have already seen those videos which we had come up with talking about what was the impact of last year's HIR. And when you look at the impact of last year's HIR, we could see that roughly there was a tracing of more or less 50 plus questions in the context of examination. And 50 plus questions was not merely topics, it was directly from notes. We had seen roughly around 42 to 45 questions being present. So with that dimension, because that actually encouraged me to continue these sessions, my dear, because at the end of the day, we need to be incentivized to sit here at morning 6 o'clock. And the biggest incentive in these sessions is consolidation. Because we have, for example, you look at Lakshmikant. Lakshmikant itself has how many pages, my dear? Roughly 600, 700 pages. You can't take or you can't pick up that book and sit just before examination. It's difficult. We will have to consolidate, right? The third dimension that we would see is the MCQ solving techniques from these sessions. Because the reason why I call them as techniques is you would have seen that prelims is not mere game of knowledge, which I keep telling, because there are so many people who are knowledgeable, but they are not clearing prelims. You have to understand that, sir, will we have a proportionate result between the knowledge and will we be able to clear prelims? I would say no, because you need to have a dimension and you need to know how to apply this knowledge. And the application dimension will fundamentally demand techniques. And that is what we are going to learn in these sessions. And we would learn these MCQ solving techniques through one fundamental structure, which I always keep telling, called generalizations. That you see that there are a bunch of generalizations which are present for every subject. be it your polity, be it your history, be it your geography, be it your economy, for every subject, we have bunch of generalizations. That means if I see that particular concept in the paper, I would apply that general principle. I call them as GPs. And for every subject, I would dictate general principle 1, general principle 2, general principle 3. On a bunch, we would roughly have 20 to 25 general principles which are going to be present, right? So one dimension of MCQ solving techniques is generalization. The second dimension that I would teach you in the context of MCQ solving techniques, that is especially with respect to this examination, is decoding the question. Because when you fundamentally try to understand that, you know that more than 50% of your paper is out of your books to a larger extent, then you might get it out, sir, how should I solve these questions? You fundamentally have to understand that there is a kind of pattern which is followed by UPSC. And we would try to decode that fundamental pattern which is existing in different subjects. And we would see how can we apply these decoded dimensions in the context of solving of these MCQs, right? And the third dimension that I'm going to do to you in this is fundamentally with PYQs. At number of instances, I will show you that without you knowing, or without you not knowing anything with respect to that particular question, how to arrive at the answer. Because that is what I fundamentally call it as crisis management. That is what I fundamentally call it as crisis management, because this is a very, very common thing that happens in your examination. Suddenly you see a surprise element coming up in the examination. It might be through your options. It might be through the concept that is being asked. It might be through the factual base which is being asked. You never know what kind of surprise you're going to have with respect to UPSC. And in that context, how to manage the crisis. And for this crisis management, this will not happen on the first go, right? This will definitely not happen on the first go. That was the reason why we had 2 to 3 sessions or 2 to 3 slots which have been put for PYQ, such that I would infuse that particular techniques into with respect to managing this crisis, right? This is the dimension that we are going to learn in this particular sessions. And the last one, most tricky. Sir, now we are going to become a Sadguru, right? Sir, emotional management to bata rahe aap. You fundamentally have to understand emotional management is very, very important in this examination. Sir, how are you going to teach us emotional management? Right? Will you make us do pranayama? Huh? Arey bachche, it's right. Huh? Breathe in, breathe out. Will I tell that? No. Don't expect me to make you do all of this. Fundamental dimension, what is my understanding with respect to emotional management in a paper? Emotional management is nothing but paper management. The way I look at the paper, my emotions are proportional to that. If I look at the paper like, very difficult, it is difficult. When I look at the paper, no, it is very lengthy, I can't do it. You can't do it. We will fundamentally have to understand what all ways of managing a paper exists. Because the maximum probabilities in a paper can be what, my dear? It can be either lengthy, right? It can be either a moderate paper. It can be either tough, and the toughness might come from the random nature of the questions, right? So we would look at different probabilities, and as per my understanding with this examination and as per my practical applications, you could roughly arrive at 6 to 7 different probabilities of the paper which will exist. And on that basis, we would see how to manage these 6 to 7 different probabilities. Fundamentally, we have to understand that we are doing all of this activity to do one thing, my dear. We are doing all of this activity to reduce the dimension of uncertainty. Because people say it is unpredictable public service commission after they write prelims examination. But you fundamentally have to understand, I am not talking about the prediction of the paper. I will fundamentally talk about managing the uncertainty factor. Because what is going to happen is, in this examination, you would see that your uncertainty is going to derive a factor called risk, right? You're risking your life, you're risking your money, you're risking your attempt. Some people will say, sir, 2 attempts over, 3 attempts over, 4 attempts over, 5 attempts over. I see in this particular class, there are people who have given 2 attempts, there are given 3 attempts, they have given 4 attempts who are still yet to clear prelims examination. So you fundamentally have to understand that the whole business of HIR creating an impact through reducing the uncertainty and reducing the risk of failure. The only risk that we have in this examination is failure. So that we will try to reduce through all of these sessions and through all of these things which I have been telling you, right? This is what is your course going to be to a larger extent. And this is going to run for 40 days. 40 into 2.5, roughly around 100 hours. In 100 hours, we will cover those subjects which have been mentioned, that is your polity, geography, environment, history, economy, and SNT. All of these subjects will fundamentally be covered in these 100 hours. Then we will have a special session for the current affairs. Right? We'll have special sessions for current affairs where we will see a lot of tracing happens in the final examination. And last year current affairs, those 25 hours wala sessions, they were very, very effective with respect to tracing, because from exclusively from those 25 hours, we had more than 8 questions appearing in the examination, right? So we would span this particular course, and this year we have added CSAT as well. And we also have test component being present. After every module that you have, you're going to have a practice test. After every module that you have, you're going to have a practice test where you will sit down to apply what we have learned in these sessions. So we are fundamentally reinforcing, we are fundamentally consolidating, and the part that which you are supposed to do is revision, right? What I would fundamentally suggest is, as and when you finish every session, please go back and revise. Spend at least 1 hour or 2 hours on the revision of this particular things, whichever I am teaching you, whichever I am dictating to you regarding these dimensions. Because if you leave and if you don't revise them, what is going to happen is you would see that everything is going to appear new if you open the book after 2 days or 3 days. And you would fundamentally see that there is a lot of piling up of the content for which you will not be able to compensate. And what do you do? When it is piling up, you give up, right? I don't want you to have this. As and when we progress across the sessions, I will teach you how to solve a mock paper, right? You will undertake something called as mock test. Practice test. I would teach you how to solve those practice tests, and I will teach you how to analyze those. And in middle of sessions, roughly maybe after 10 days of these sessions, we would have what kind of common mistakes that most of you will make. And from that, I will try to address, roughly we would see 4 or 5 common mistakes which are being made by every aspirant irrespective of the number of attempts. We will try to address those. And then again, we would have a similar session after 25 days of this session, right? So this is what whole of your session is going to span for. Okay. Before I enter into the subject, let me give some disclaimers. Because one fundamental problem I could find in last year batch of HIR was that people were not able to digest the fact that whole of the prelims I could solve by using 250 to 300 pages notes, right? There are some disclaimers which I am putting here. Okay. The same notes was used by me to solve 2023 question paper. And 2023 question paper, I did not solve it outside exam hall. I gave myself the exam, right? Did I clear? I cleared, right? I cleared. The same notes I used to solve my 2021 question paper also. And I did not solve 2021 question paper outside the exam hall. I solved 2021 question paper within the exam hall as an aspirant. Did I clear? I cleared. I used the same notes to solve my 2020 question paper also. And 2020 question paper, I did not solve out. I solved the examination. I took the examination and I solved the question paper within the exam hall. Did I clear? Yes. The same question paper was, or the same notes was used for 2019. 2019. And did I clear? I cleared. Did I take it outside exam hall or inside exam hall? Inside exam hall. You fundamentally have to understand few things here. All of the things that I'm teaching you in these sessions is one theory, right? And this theory was fundamentally put to test, not once, not twice, not thrice, not 4 times, not 5 times, 6 times, right? 6 times. I have put all of this theory that I'm teaching you to the test for 6 times inside exam hall, right? And whatever I teach you in the context of PYQs with respect to elimination techniques, with respect to the MCQ solving techniques, I did not derive them outside exam hall. I applied them in the exam hall. I have not gone for reverse engineering process like people say that faculty solve the questions after looking at the key. No. Exam hall lo key istara hai. No. I solved those elimination techniques. I devised those elimination techniques. I applied those elimination techniques. I applied those MCQ solving techniques and paper management techniques in the exam hall. How many times it was tested? 6. Did I clear all 6 times? Because if it was once, then maybe you would have said, sir, by chance. If it was twice, then sir, you were lucky. If it is more than 3 times, it can't be luck. It can't be by chance. It is all theory put to practice in the exam hall, and whatever I have done, I am teaching you. Right? This is the disclaimer which I was waiting to give, because there were so many doubts which were arising from these sessions. Right? And this is what it is. Okay. Now, the only thing that I would request you to do whenever you are attending these sessions is please don't miss any session. Because one fundamental dimension of your incremental improvement for next 40 days is only going to happen if you ensure consistency. If there is no consistency, please don't expect any sort of improvement in this. Consistency fundamentally means whatever it is, you finish your session on the same day that I'm conducting. If you're getting an online recording, if you're seeing it online, or if you're coming to the class, if you're not coming to the class, please be very, very clear that you're finishing that particular session on the same day. And so that you're not only finishing that particular session on the same day, but you're also revising the same content the same day, such that next day it is easy for me, it is easy for you, because everywhere we are going to have a linked concepts. Please be very, very clear with respect to what we are going to do in this sessions, right? This is what is my general understanding and general dimensions that I was supposed to give regarding this sessions. Now let's start. We're going to start with polity, your favorite. Kada? And everybody is an expert. Legal expert, judicial expert, right? Or whichever, constitutional expert, right? Because some of you will even read what, my dear, Constituent Assembly debates for polity. Right? Please be very, very clear. The simplest source that we generally follow, right, is Lakshmikant. Right? Lakshmikant should have become one very, very good friend of yours by now. Right? So that is one basic book which we generally follow for prelims examination. If you want to add some source, that is, there is one textbook on political theory. There is one textbook on political theory. Just read it. Right? Don't worry, because all of the dimensions will be covered in this session. Now, when you look at polity, we roughly have around 15 questions coming from this particular subject. And when we roughly have around 15 questions coming from this particular subject, here you have to understand fundamentally that this is going to constitute 30 marks. And out of these 15 questions that we generally observe, 10 to 12 questions are either simple, or simple fundamentally means they are direct. Anything that is direct in your prelims examination has to be considered as simple. or they are repeated from PYQs. They are repeated from PYQs. For example, in 2023, we had one question on limited government and constitutionalism. That question though, kitne baar pucha yaar? They asked it in 2019, 2020, 2021, 2023. So that means every time you have a question on constitutionalism and limited government, that means we have some bunch of questions which are constantly repeated. So we see that repetition happening from PYQs. Roughly 3 to 4 questions is where you're going to have some problem in addressing these, because generally these either become tough because of the conceptual clarity that the examiner demands, right? These become tough because of either the conceptual clarity that the examiner demands, or not only the conceptual clarity which is demanded for these 3 to 4 questions. Sometimes there is a overload of factual base, right? For example, Gopal Swami Iyengar committee. In 2021, there was one question on this Gopal Swami Iyengar committee. Nobody heard about that committee before, right? At least those aspirants who were moderate enough, who were serious enough about this examination, did not hear that particular committee. It fundamentally indicates that there is an overload of factual base which happens in these questions. The simplest solution that I would do for this is go for, we will follow the approach of generalizations. We will fundamentally follow the approach of generalizations to answer or address these questions, right? As and when we progress across the different themes of polity, we would see that we are going to have this dimension. Okay. Now, when you look at whole of your polity, you see that there are 3-4 areas in which you have questions coming. One basic dimension that we see is with respect to the basic philosophy of constitution. The basic philosophy of constitution, it might be with respect to your preamble, it might be with respect to your fundamental rights, or it might be with respect to DPSP, or it might be with respect to your fundamental duties. So these are what are going to constitute the philosophy of the constitution. And in this context, we will discuss different dimensions today. Today, we are going to have a session on philosophy of, or the basic philosophy of constitution. That means more or less today's session is going to be based on terminology analysis. That means we will try to understand some concepts through these terms. The second area where we constantly see question coming up is from your parliament or state legislatures, right? And in this, when you divide these systems with respect to, I would divide it into 2-3 dimensions. One is the structure of the parliament. That means the nature of Rajya Sabha, the nature of Lok Sabha, the inherent structure, the bicameral structure. The second dimension that we have with respect to parliament is their functioning. And most of the times we definitely see a question on the legislative functioning, especially with respect to different forms of bills. We constantly see either a question on money bill or a finance bill. Every year there is one question at least from money bill or finance bill or the constitutional amendment bill, right? In तीनों में से definitely you have one question coming in the examination. You can go back and refer, my dear. For example, this year there was a question on money bill and finance bill, right? In 2018 there was a question on money bill. Which of the following constitutes money bill? You will definitely have one question on money bill or finance bill or constituent as amendment bill. Then the third dimension that we see in this is with respect to parliamentary accountability systems. And when you talk about the parliamentary accountability systems, that might be with respect to your question R, that might be with respect to your no confidence motion, that might be with respect to parliamentary committees, right? Or that might be with respect to your anti-defection. And you see that speaker happens to be the guardian of the parliament. And you see that office of speaker and office of deputy speaker becomes very, very important. For example, we had a question on deputy speaker in 2022. So we see that these offices become very, very important. And sometimes when they want to move in, then they talk about the functionaries of the parliament. That is your council of ministers, your council of ministers, right? Then your president. You see president being a functionary there because parliament as a definition includes Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha as well as President. So we see the dimension a question being on president or with respect to your vice president, right? Then the third region that we generally have question is with respect to bodies. You will definitely see one question coming from your bodies, that is either your statutory bodies or constitutional bodies, right? Or sometimes even executive bodies, where you see that question fundamentally appears in the examination. That means the inherent nature of the questioning that generally happens in this context is they would verify or they would ask you which of the following is a constitutional body, which of the following is a statutory body. For example, in 2022, there was one question on T-board. There was one question on CGWA, Central Groundwater Authority. In 2020, there was again a question on CGWA. This year, there was question with respect to which of the following are the constitutional bodies. That means whenever you read any organization, please remember 2-3 dimensions, right? Because the questioning area is very, very important. Whenever you read any organization, you will see that whether it is constitutional body or statutory body or executive body. The second dimension that we see whenever we come across any organization in general reading, apart from these sessions, in these I would give you a list of these things. Apart from these readings, if you are making any general reading and you come across any body, the second dimension that you need to understand with respect to the organization is what is the mandate of the organization. That means what is the general function of the organization. And the third most important dimension when you look at any of the organization is you fundamentally look into which ministry it belongs to. Which ministry it belongs to. So you fundamentally have to see that the organization as a question or as a theme in examination is repeated. And if you look at what is the thing that they are asking one of these three things. Either it is belonging to some ministry, either it is belonging to the mandate, or it is what is the kind of the mandate that is existing, or either it is with respect to whether it is constitutional, statutory, or executive. So we would see the list of bodies and we would see those bodies of, because constitutional bodies are limited. But when we look at statutory bodies and executive bodies, we have a non-exhaustive list. So in that context, we will restrict according to our current importance with respect to these statutory bodies and the corresponding list. The last dimension that we have, or one more dimension that we generally have here, is with respect to judiciary, federalism, and local governance. Judiciary, you have one question on judiciary, my dear. Hamesha, you will definitely have one question on judiciary and the judicial dimensions. It might be on Gram Nyayalaya, or it might be with respect to Lok Adalats, right? Or it might be with respect to Nalsa, or it might be with respect to your Supreme Court. For example, in 2019, there was a question on the contempt of court as well as the process of removal of judges. So in that context, we fundamentally see that judiciary is one important dimension that is existing. Then a link concept that we always come across is there is some reference that is made to the dimensions of federalism. It might be that is a direct question which is going to come from your Article 246, that is with respect to your 7th schedule. Or sometimes in 2016, there was one question which was made on Article 249, that is with respect to the powers of the Rajya Sabha to legislate on the state subjects. So in that context, we see that there is one particular reference that is made with respect to the federalism. And the third dimension is local governance, right? Hamesha, you have one question on either 5th schedule or 6th schedule. You will never see a paper without this. You will never see a paper without this. Right? This year they had asked about schedule areas, right? Last year, 5th, 6th schedule. Every year you have one dimension which is present with respect to your 5th and 6th schedule at any cost. There is no iota of doubt with respect to your 5th schedule and 6th schedule, and that is where we see with respect to your local governance system, right? In that, there is one pending area which is present with respect to the prelims examination, that is with respect to the specialities, and that is with respect to Article 243G and 243W, that is with 11th schedule and 12th schedule. That particular dimension is little neglected in this region, which might appear anytime. right? Because that is one dimension, because we see one issue that is existing at present is the non-devolution of powers to the local governments by the state legislatures. So in that context, we are going to discuss that dimension, right, in this session. And Baki, they are all miscellaneous. For example, sometimes they asked about, in 2021, if I'm not wrong, they had asked about police custody and judicial custody, right? Sometimes they asked about parole, right, for law. So sometimes, for example, this year there was some question on prison laws. So you see that there is some miscellaneous region which always exists when it comes to the questioning by UPSC. So we will see some way or methodology how to handle these miscellaneous topics. I would discuss some miscellaneous topics, but if some question comes out of this miscellaneous topics, what is the methodology to handle this, right? So all of these dimensions we are going to see in the next 5 days, right? Let's get into our business today. That is starting with your philosophy of constitution. And before anything that you have to understand, you see that the first thing that you have to understand is what is the meaning or what is the component or what are the components of state. Because in 2021 there was a direct question which was asked with respect to which of the following statements indicate the meaning of a state. When you look at any meaning of a state, you fundamentally have 4 components. Right, before I continue, there is a way of making notes, right? Whenever I'm teaching, whatever kinds of diagrams that I draw, please draw them in your notes. For the reason that all of these are going to be your revision notes. Okay. And whenever I'm dictating, you please follow a point by point approach. పేజీల కోసం ఆలోచించకండి ప్లీజ్, రైట్? మీ దగ్గర పేజీలు లేవు, తక్కువ ఉన్నాయంటే నన్ను అడగండి, రైట్? Somehow I will raise the fund and sponsor. Okay, right? So you see that whenever I dictate, we are going to make it in a point format, right? And you would see that maximum of these points will be very, very short and limited. Okay. So when you look at the state, you fundamentally observe that there are 4 components that is existing. One is the territory. The second one that is going to exist is with respect to the government, right? Then population and sovereignty. So you see that when you look at the understanding of any state, if all of these 4 components are existing, you call it as a state. That means you see that there has to be territory for which you have certain elements of citizenship existing. And for this citizenship, you see a kind of administration for which you need government. And to maintain the systems, you need to understand that all of these systems are to be preserved, and for which you need sovereignty. And that particular dimension is what is called as a state. And you see that state is more of a political entity. And we always come across one more particular understanding, that is nation. When you try to understand nation, we always see that nation has got to do with respect to more of a cultural dimension. More of a cultural dimension. And please write down one statement. More of a cultural dimension. And you would see, write down one statement. The boundaries of the nation. The boundaries of the nation are not coterminous. The boundaries of the nation are not coterminous. With the political boundaries. With the political boundaries. Or the state as an entity. Or the state as an entity. Now, with that basic understanding, we will extend this discussion to Article 12 of your Constitution, because your Article 12 categorically says what is the constituents, or what is the composition of a state, or which of the following are considered as a state. Take down the list. Article 12 defines the state as Government and Parliament of India. Government and Parliament of India. government and legislature of each state, government and legislature of each state, all local or other authorities, all local or other authorities within the territory of India, within the territory of India, all local and other authorities, all local and other authorities under the control of government of India, under the control of government of India, right? Apart from this, we also have certain judicial pronouncements here in this context, that is especially in the context of R.D. Shetty versus Airport Authority of India. In this, judiciary gives 5 kind of principles for you to consider which of the following is going to be part of state or not. Please write down those 5 principles or 5 points. First, state as the main funding source. State as the main funding source. Second, deep and pervasive control by the state. Deep and pervasive control by the state. Third, functional character is governmental. Functional character is governmental. Fourth, government department transferred to corporation. Government department transferred to corporation. 5, monopoly status. Monopoly status conferred or protected by government. Monopoly status conferred or protected by government. Right? Now, with the same consideration, there was a debate whether judiciary is part of the state or not. Right? There is always a debate which goes on with respect to whether judiciary is part of the state or not. Now, in that consideration, please remember, right? Please remember, you see that the judicial functions are not considered under Article 12. Judicial functions are not considered under Article 12. But whereas the administrative functions are considered under Article 12. Whenever you have the debate whether judiciary is part of it, whenever it is having, you know that it has both functions. One is administrative, the other one is judicial. Whenever it is in the context of judicial functions, you don't have it being considered under Article 12. And whenever it is in the ambit of its administrative function, we call it, or it is seen to be in the ambit of Article 12. The simplest understanding, right? From here, we will next move into the dimensions with respect to the preamble. We will move into the dimensions with respect to the preamble. Write down. Keep writing in a snippet form, right? Based on objective resolution. Based on objective resolution. Considered as identity card of constitution. Considered as identity card of constitution. Derives authority from public. Derives authority from public. Specifies objectives. Reduce offset. ఏదమ్మా నాయిస్ అదా ఇదా offset. Specifies objectives. Next, provides the nature of Indian state. Provides the nature of Indian state. Used by judiciary for constitutional interpretations. Used by judiciary for constitutional interpretations. Non-justiciable in nature. Non-justiciability fundamentally means that it is not legally enforceable. Non-justiciable in nature. Can it be amended or not? Yes, it can be amended. It can be amended without affecting the basic structure of the constitution. It can be amended without affecting the basic structure of the constitution. Last point, inspired from US constitution. Inspired from US constitution. Right? Now, when you look at the nature it talks about, is what, my dear? Triple S DR. Triple S DR. That is sovereign, secular, socialist, democratic, and republic. Right? In 2021, there was a question. What was the nature of the Indian state by 1950, during or 1950? That means you see that in this, what were the words which were added by amendment? Socialist and secular. Which amendment? 42nd. That means inherently during 1950, what was the nature? It was SDR. That is sovereign, democratic, and republic. But after that, we see under 42nd constitutional amendment, we see that here secular and socialist being added. Right? Now, with that basic understanding, when you look at the meaning of sovereignty, when you look at the understanding of sovereignty, you see, right? Write down. Just write down. Managing own affairs. Managing own affairs. Protection of the territory. Protection of the territory. And abiding the principles of non-interference. Abiding the principles of non-interference. It fundamentally means what? Sovereignty as a dimension is going to talk about protection of your territory to a larger extent. And not only the dimension of the protection of the territory to a larger extent, but you also see that you have a dimension of engagement with other countries, but not interference. That no other country can interfere with the affairs of India, because as India being a sovereign nation, it has the capacity, it has the right, it has the obligation to manage its own affairs. Right? One dimension. Then the next word that we have in this context, now before we move, we see the nature when it comes to the sovereignty here, we'll have to understand one dimension is what is the nature of the state that is present vis-a-vis your center, or we call it as what, my dear? Union. Right? Write down one line. India is a non-destructible union. Non-destructible union. With the destructible states. Our Indian Union is not based on the agreement with states. Is it based on agreement or not based on agreement? It is not based on agreement. Right? That is what your Article 1 says. And in the context of Article 2, what happens, my dear? In the context of Article 2, you have the dimensions to modify. Right? You have the dimensions to change. Right? You have the dimensions to add. Right? You have the dimensions to add or destruct. Now, when it comes to this, you will have to fundamentally understand Article 2 is more to do about the creation. Article 2 is more to do about the creation. And you see that Article 3 that is existing with respect to a constitution, it has to do more with respect to the modification dimension. That means your Article 2 and Article 3 constitutes, or Article 2 and Article 3 fundamentally states we have destructible nature. We have destructible nature. And when you look at Article 3, you know that you need a prior consent of the president. You need prior consent of the president to pass a bill on the basis of Article 3. And there is a categorical statement which talks about that Article 4 states that whatever activities that have been undertaken under Article 2 and Article 3 are not subjected to Article 368. They are not part of Article 368, or they are not considered under Article 368. Are you understanding? And there's one more dimension here. Now, all this is whatever is happening within the territory, right? What is happening within the territory, the domestic affairs that are existing here. Now, if there is an engagement with respect to external territory, here we see that there are two ways in which it is going to happen. Now, we see whether we are exchanging a territory, whether we are losing some area of a territory, whether we are exchanging a territory, whether we are losing an area of territory, or whether we are seceding some area of territory. What happens is, for these activities that are existing with respect to the external territories, you're going to have a constitutional amendment. And one classic example of this is, you see, the 100th constitutional amendment. You see that the 100th constitutional amendment is with respect to the land boundary agreement. You see that 100th constitutional amendment is with respect to land boundary agreement, and you see the exchange of territories between what, my dear? Between India and Bangladesh. Because one of the problem that was existing was what? It was more of an enclaved structures that were present with respect to India and Bangladesh. And in order to avoid this administrative complexity that was existing, and in order to promote the administrative dimension, we had gone for exchange of territories. And in this process, India had lost some of its area. So for that, we consider there has to be a constitutional amendment. That is why we are calling it as 100th constitutional amendment. But when it talks about the other dimension, that means if you're not losing, but mere changes that are made, there is a process which includes with respect to your resolution. That means it is more of a executive action. It is more of a executive action that is existing here if we do not lose any of these territories that are present, right? Are you understanding? Now, if you please remember that, for suppose sometimes UPSC plays with some kinds of words. Okay? It plays with the word mandatory. Right? Or it also plays with the word mentions, and it also plays with the word defines. These are the three common words which are played by the UPSC in the statements with respect to your polity as a subject. Now let's understand some dimensions here. That whenever you find a word mandatory, generally, again I'm keeping the principle, generally, whenever you find a word mandatory, right, nothing can be so imposing in nature. Right? Whenever somebody says, or whenever it is told it is mandatory for people's participation, don't you think there is a paradox in the statement itself? They are saying mandatory one side, but they are also saying people's participation. Now, people's participation is it voluntary provision or mandatory provision? Voluntary provision. But the other side, what are they saying, my dear? mandatory. Don't you think there is a paradox which is existing in the same statement? Right? And India being a democratic nature, none of your legislations to a larger extent can be so much imposing. So generally, when we find this word, it is mostly a wrong statement. It is most of the times a wrong statement for the reason that India being democratic, we cannot have so much of impositions. That is the logic why I'm telling that mandatory as a word has to be, you should be watchful whenever you find this word, right? The second thing that UPSC generally plays upon is mentions. Are mentioning mein kya hai? Mentions means what? It is just mentioning, right? It is just mentioning. Matlab passing reference. And constitution mein there are so many things which are mentioned, right? There are so many things which are mentioned. But whenever they are using the word mentioning, they will play with two things. One, they will say constitution. And the other thing that they will immediately come into the picture is original constitution. There's a catch here. Please be very, very watchful with these words, right? Because UPSC fundamentally plays in these statements. So when they say it is mentioned in the constitution, it is mentioned in the constitution fundamentally implies what? At present. At present, right? That means inclusion of all of your amendments. Inclusion, this in the constitution, if you are seeing that there is an assumption, there is an understanding that it is including all the amendments that are present. It is including all the amendments that are present. But in this context, when you talk about the original constitution, when you talk about the original constitution, that means the present constitution minus amendments, right? Constitution as it is when it was in 1950. Constitution as it is when it was in 1950, it fundamentally implies what? The amendment dimension is not taken into the picture. The preamble in the original constitution, did we have secular and socialist in that? Please be very clear with that. Please be very clear with that, right? Whenever it is using the word mentions, you please be watchful whether it mentions in original constitution or just constitution, right? Yeah, right? Then one more, it uses the word defines. Defines. General principle 1, GP1, write down. Most of the times, nothing is defined in constitution. Most of the times, nothing is defined in constitution. This is general principle 1. What is the logic here? You already see, right? For us, logically, we know roughly around 371 articles because we have 371 A, B, those differences. 371 articles with the different subclauses. Already, don't you think the document of constitution is very bulky? Now, if constitution goes on defining every term that it is mentioning, is it possible? Not possible. That is the logic behind, my dear. Because when you look at any of the law, it is fundamentally seen that the law of the land most of the times should be comprehensible and most of the times has to be simple. And constitution happens to be the law of the land. And when you find the constitution happens to be the law of the land, you can't sit and keep defining every term which is mentioned in the constitution. Right? For example, this year there was one question. Article 335 defines the efficiency. Kya efficiency? Kiska efficiency? Kaun sa efficiency? Right? Does it define minority? But does it mention minority? Does it classify minorities? Yes. It talks about religious and linguistic minorities. Please be very, very clear. Right? Mentioning and classification to a certain extent is moderate. If you want me to arrange these in the order of most of the times mention is a right statement with respect to polity. Please be very clear. Sometimes you have to be very, very careful with respect to classification. Most of the times, mandatory and defined is incorrect. Now, whenever I'm teaching you general principles, what are you supposed to do, my dear? Whenever I'm teaching you general principles, I want you to immediately go back and open your PYQs and apply these general principles from 2011 till 2023 question paper. Most of the times, I'm using the word most of the times. Did I say all of the times? All of the times is an extreme statement. So it is eliminated. Don't worry, we'll come into that phase. Right? PYQ sessions you will enjoy. Like, arre, abba, oho, indulo intunda. You will see. Because whenever you're solving your examination, whenever you're writing a prelims examination, you should not bog down with the pressure. You should enjoy. Bah, ye adigade. Oh, acha. Aha. Enjoy. And when you enjoy the paper will enjoy you the way you're solving the paper. Automatically, what will happen? Scene cut cheste mains hall. Yes or no, my dear? Why are we here? Poddunne 6 గంటలకు లేచి. Why? Finally, where is our destination? Labasna. Usse pehle you should sit in mains hall or not? Right? All of your wallpapers are what? Labasna, emblem. Sab chal raha hai. Right? Way to Labasna and okay, itla arrow okati untadi. అవునా? వీలైతే నీ ఫోటో ఇక్కడ ఒక జెండా పెట్టుకుంటూ దాని మీద కూడా నీ ఫోటో పెట్టుకొని ఉంటావు ఇలా. You have to fundamentally understand that we have the convergence of the objectives. What we are working for, what you are working for is meeting at a point of you clearing this examination. Please be very clear. The objectives are very clear from both the sides, right? So you need to fundamentally understand how much of effort that I put in, you will have to reciprocate across these sessions. Then only you will find it meaningful and useful. Okay, right? Moving into the next dimension, that is, what is the next word? It is socialist, right? When you look at socialist, is it mentioned in constitution? It is mentioned in preamble. Was it mentioned in original constitution? No. Right? Was it mentioned in original constitution? No. Right? It was inspired from USSR. It was inspired from the socialist planning, the socialist nature of USSR. Right? Is it part of basic structure? It is not part of basic structure. You fundamentally have to understand we have triple SDR. In this, sovereignty is part of basic structure. Everything is part of basic structure except socialist. Because are we still socialist now? Or it is a mixed economy? It is a mixed economy. We are not socialist. We are no more socialist. That is why it is not part of your basic structure. Right? All other words are majorly part of your basic structure except socialist or socialism. Please understand. Okay. And when you look at this dimension, the simplest understanding of socialism is it is all to do with respect to your planning. Just because we had the state planning with respect to the economic activities that is in the context of your 5-year plans, we declared or we called India as a socialist. But what is the actual meaning of socialism? We see that there is a conflict that exists between socialism and communism. You remember, just remember basic, that anything that is socialist in nature, that every activity is performed by the state. It might be production, it might be distribution, it might be profit, everything is performed by the state. But when you look at communism, the central entity of functioning in the context of communism is community. That's all. Right? The central entity of the functioning of the communism is community. That means everything is centered around community. We have community property, community production, The central entity is community. But whereas when you look at the focal point of socialist tendencies or socialism, it is the state. Very easy. Now, with that basic understanding, we see that there are different kinds of planning which are existing with respect to these systems. That there are different kinds of planning which are existing with respect to these systems. One is indicative planning. One is indicative planning. Indicative. Right, just write down. It is inclusive in nature. It is inclusive in nature. Majorly decentralized. Majorly decentralized. And involves both public and private entities. And involves both public and private entities. Right? So indicative means what? Inclusive. Indicative, inclusive. Easy. Indicative, inclusive. The second kind of planning that we have is imperative. Imperative. Write down. It is such kind of planning. It is such kind of planning in which the complete control. It is such kind of planning in which the complete control is in the central authority's hand, or it is in the central authority. Right? Imperative planning is what? That everything is managed by the center. Right? Everything is managed by a structure, everything is managed by a hierarchy. You don't have the interplay of the market, but you fundamentally see that everything is going to be in the hands of the central authority. And you see hierarchy taking over the market. Right? Hierarchy taking over the market, that is what is imperative. Imperative majorly is imposing. Imperative is majorly what, my dear? It is imposing in nature. Indicative is majorly what? Inclusive. Imperative, imposing. Imperative, imposing. The third kind of planning that we have is prospective planning. The third kind of planning we have is prospective. Prospective. Right now, it involves long-term strategies. It involves long-term strategies. With the objectives set for large time periods. Large time periods, right? Prospective fundamentally means what? It is long term. Prospective fundamentally means it is long term. It's easy, right? Prospective planning. You need to have prospective planning. Should have prospective planning in UPSC. UPSC is maximum, it is not 5-year plan. Right? Maximum 1-2 साल यार उस खत्म कर लो और चले जाओ. Right? Don't make it like 5-year plan. Sir, we need to have long term. Sir, coaching in 2021, optional in 2022, right? GS in 2023, mentorship in 2024, sir, HIR 2025, pata nahi. Right? So 2026, I will attempt along with my kid. Sir, prospective hai wo. Right? Okay. These are different kinds of plannings which are existing in the context of socialism. Okay. The next is what, my dear, with respect to secularism. Secularism. Added by 42nd constitutional amendment. लिख लो. Added by 42nd constitutional amendment. Follows. Next. Follows equidistant principles or principle of equidistance. Principle of equidistance. Next. Intervention of state into religious affairs. Intervention of state into religious affairs as and when it is required. As and when it is required. Positive form of secularism. Positive form of secularism. No strict separation between religion and state. No strict separation between religion and state. Right? Well, let's see something here. Secularism as a word. Was it present in original constitution? No. It was added. It was added by when? 42nd constitutional amendment. 42nd constitutional amendment. But when you look at the principles of secularism, was it present in original constitution? Principles of secularism, was it present in original constitution? Yes. Article 25 to 28. Article 25 to 28. They were present in your original constitution. The principles were present. But did we have this? No. Does your constitution define secularism? No. Does your constitution say what is the nature of the secularism that is followed by India? It does not explicitly say. It does not explicitly say. Right? It does not explicitly say what is the nature of the secularism that is followed. Please be very clear. Is it mentioned in the constitution? Is it mentioned in the original constitution? No. Be very, very clear. Right? Please do not overthink in these dimensions again. I am very, very clear with respect to the words that I am using here. Original constitution means without amendments. Constitution means anything that is general, mentioning, defining, classifying. Please be very clear. Okay. Next. Next is democracy. Democracy. You know that it is all about rule of people, right? It is people centric. It is people centric. And you know that the inherent characteristic feature of democracy is what? Representation. The inherent characteristic feature of democracy is representation. And we see that democracy being classified in different manners. One is either the direct or indirect democracy. When you look at direct democracy, you know that people will fundamentally be engaged in policy making and making of law. People will directly be engaged in the policy making or making of law. That means there is a direct devolution of power which is done with respect to your people in a direct democracy. That is why we are calling it as direct. We are directly deriving the power from whom? Public. Indirect means We see the representatives of people. We see the representatives of the people who are going to fundamentally rule the people, right? They are going to be engaged. There is an indirect engagement. The indirect engagement is what? Through elections. The indirect engagement that is existing here is what? It is through elections. It is through elections that a set of, or a constituency is electing a representative, and the representative is going to be representing the electoral mandate, representing the interests of that section of the society. Right? Indirect. There is another classification which is done in the context of democracy. One is a procedural democracy. The other one is a substantive democracy. Procedural democracy, the other one is substantive democracy. Now, when you look at procedural democracy, a procedural democracy is mere procedures. When a particular democratic nature, or when a particular democracy is following mere procedures. And what is the biggest procedure of any democracy? The biggest procedure of any democracy is elections. The biggest procedure of any democracy is what, my dear? It is elections. So whenever you see a particular democracy following merely the procedure, it is what is considered as a procedural democracy. Procedural democracy. There is another dimension, that is substantive democracy. Substantive democracy means you fundamentally ensure the societal dimension, you fundamentally ensure the economic dimension, you fundamentally ensure the political dimension in integration. That means you are not only focusing on elections, but you are also focusing on poverty alleviation, employment generation, skill development, housing, basic needs, right? Industrial growth. So when you try to emphasize upon a comprehensive nature of the democracy, when you try to emphasize upon the economic dimension as well as the societal dimension, that is what is considered as substantive democracy. Is India a substantive democracy or procedural democracy? बहुत safe खेल रहे यार तुम लोग. हाँ, interview already you got ready. Right? Is India procedural or substantive? Sir, I think it is substantive, sir. What? We are more of a procedural democracy transitioning towards substantive democracy. Please be very clear. Because we fundamentally abide by the principles of elections to a larger extent. But are we having the societal parameters up to the mark in the context? No. Human Development Index is 131. Nutrition is 111. 3 digits. Right? Poverty, multidimensionally poor, according to Niti Aayog, is around 16%. And the amount of skill training or skill level that is present is what, my dear? 4% with respect to formal training, and 46% of the graduates are employable in nature. That means, are we having? And when you look at the unemployment rates, it is roughly ranging from 4 to 7%. Are you understanding? That means we see that there are a lot of issues which are existing inherently here. The dimension of gender inequalities. You see more than 34% of wage gap existing in India. So that fundamentally indicates what, my dear? We are a procedural democracy because we have periodic elections being ensured. But we are transitioning towards substantive democracy. Do you understand? Right? So this is with respect to democracy. There is another very, very important dimension of democracy. That is, one dimension is rule of law. When you talk about rule of law, what do you understand by rule of law? Likh lo. Just write. It is to control the unlimited power of the authority. It is to control the unlimited power of the authority. Next, restricts the arbitrary application of law. Restricts the arbitrary application of law. Next, supremacy of law. Supremacy of law. And all are equal before law. Supremacy of law. And all are equal before law. This is philosophy inspired from UK or US? It is inspired from UK. It is inspired from UK. Right? You would have heard about A.V. Dicey's concept of rule of law. Yes, we see that there are three principles of A.V. Dicey's rule of law. And how many are applicable to India? Only two. Because one of the principle of A.V. Dicey's is what? It says that constitution is derived from public, or constitution is derived from people. But what is the fundamental dimension here? It is constitutional supremacy which is existing in the context of India. In the context of UK, is it constitutional supremacy or the supremacy or parliamentary sovereignty there? Parliamentary sovereignty there. In the context of India, it is constitutional supremacy which is existing. Right? So that is one simple understanding. There's one more thing. Now tell me, what is the difference between rule of law and rule by law? Huh? Is there any difference? Rule of law and rule by law. Right. It is law being used. Law being used as a tool of repression. As a tool of repression. Repression. Not depression. Repression. Depression మీకుంటది. ఉండకూడదంటే ఏమవ్వాలి? HIR సెషన్స్ రెగ్యులర్ గా అటెండ్ అవ్వాలి. Right? Repression. No control on the authority. No control on the authority. And rules favoring certain sections of the society. Rules favoring certain sections of the society. Don't you think there is a altogether flip in the understanding? Rule of law and rule by law. Rule of law was what? Controlling the arbitrariness, controlling the authority. Rule by law, no control. But just understand this. Okay. What is the next principle that we have? And before I transition to next principle, understand that we have different types of capitals which are present. In 2019, there was one question which was asked with respect to social capital. Right? Which of the following sentences or which of the following indicates the meaning of social capital? Right? Just understand this dimension. We see that we have something called as a natural capital. We have something called as a physical capital. We have something called as financial capital. We have something called as human capital. And we have something called as social capital. We see that there are different types of capitals which are existing. Just understand the meaning of each of this. When look at natural capital, it has got to do with your natural resources. These natural resources can be with respect to your minerals. These natural resources can be with respect to biodiversity, that is flora, fauna. Right? You see that it is talking about the natural capital. In environment, I will discuss about something called as ecosystem accounting principles. I will discuss about something called as ecosystem accounting principles. And when you look at ecosystem accounting principles, that is where we are fundamentally looking at the calculations of your natural capital. And in environment, again, I will teach you about one more particular concept called bioprospecting. Right? That also, bioprospecting is also the estimation of the natural capital that is existing. Right? So that is one. When you look at the physical capital, it has got to do more about with respect to your infrastructure. It might be with respect to your roads. It might be with respect to your bridges. It might be with respect to your railways. It might be with respect to your transport. Any of this, the physical infrastructure that is existing. Because you see that this physical infrastructure which is existing, or the physical capital that is existing, more to do, you know that infrastructure can be social infrastructure, infrastructure can be technological infrastructure, infrastructure can also be economic infrastructure. All of these dimensions are included where, my dear? In Physical capital. When you look at financial capital, it is more to do with your paisa, money, the finances. Finances. Human capital. It has got to do with the systems which enhance the productivity or the potential of a human being. It has got to do with the systems which enhance the productivity or the potential of a human being. For example, skilling, education, health, all of these dimensions are what? Enabling the human capital dimension. Enabling the human capital dimension. That means it is all about with respect to the potential and the productivity of an individual. When you look at the social capital, it talks about the mutual trust that is existing. This was what the word that was given in 2019 question paper. The mutual trust that is existing, the societal order that is existing, the peace that is existing, the societal stability that is existing, preserving the societal fabric of a particular region. That is what is you talk about social capital. Because at the end of the day, you see that society is what matter. It is all about interactions between different units of the society. And when you have these interactions which are existing with respect to different units of the society, you would fundamentally understand what? That you need harmony, you need peace, you need order. And all of these conditions are conducive for you to ensure what? Mutual trust. And that is what is meant by your social capital. Okay. Next. What dimension? Republic. Write down. All offices are open to public. All offices are open to public. That means it has got to do with what, my dear? Popular sovereignty. It has got to do with your popular sovereignty. Head of the state is elected. Head of the state is elected. What is the opposite of republic? Monarchy. Right? Do we have constitutional monarchy? Yes or no? No. Constitutional monarchy hai nahi. I am asking, are we having any example for constitutional monarchy? What? Was I never asked India. Did I ever say India is constitutional monarchy? Then क्या बात कर रहे हैं? Right? ठीक है. So that is the simplest understanding with respect to republic. Nothing much. ठीक है. Then we would enter into the principles. We were discussing the nature of Indian state, which was given in preamble. The next we are going to discuss is what are the objectives? What are the objectives? Now in that, the first objective that it talks about is what, my dear? Justice. The first dimension it talks about is justice. Write down. Equal consideration to all individuals. Equal consideration to all individuals. Then it is about being just. It is about being just. Being just. Being fair. It is about being just. It is about being fair. And being reasonable. And being reasonable. It includes social, political, and economic justice. It includes social, political, and economic justice. Political justice is derived from what, my dear? Fundamental rights. Economic and social justice from, please be clear, right? Does your fundamental rights talk about social and economic justice? Yeah. Yes, no. Wait till I talk about this, right? Ruko zara. Sabar karo. Right? What was the last point I dictated? Derived from Russian constitution or inspired from the Russian principles. Is it part of basic structure? It is part of basic structure. It is part of basic structure. Next, forms of justice. Different forms are there. One, distributive. Two, retributive. Three, restorative. And proportional. Right? First, write down about proportional justice. Balancing of principles of justice with principles of proportionality. Balancing with principles of justice with principles of proportionality. Right? Next, distributive justice. Fair share of benefits and resources. Right? Distributive means what, my dear? It is all about distribution. The name itself says. Can I say PDS is to ensure distributive justice? Right? Don't you think so? Those principles are yes, right? Then retributive. Focuses on consequences. And believes in harsh punishments. That means, what is the simplest understanding? Right? Is Indian legal system retributive or restorative? Restorative. Most of the Indian legal system is retributive. That in the context, what happens if you do some crime, you are subjected to punishment. Do we focus on rehabilitation of both the victim and the perpetrator? No. Do we try to restore the lifestyles of both of them? No. But what are we more focused upon? Punishments. So is it retributive or restorative? Retributive, right? Then restorative justice. Right now. Focuses on negotiations. Relations. Focuses on negotiations, relations, and the process of healing and the process of healing ఏమంటారు heal, right? What is healing? మానిపోవడం, అదే healing, right? Now here in any aspect we see that there are two dimensions which are existing. One is the victim, the other one is the perpetrator, right? When we look at this, what happens is we see that this perpetrator is subjected to some activity on this victim, and this individual is subjected to some effect. And what are we seeing is when we try to focus only on this dimension with respect to perpetrator, with respect to your punishments, we are calling it as what, my dear? Retributive. But in restorative, what are we trying to do is we are trying to make this individual sit and negotiate. Means what? We are trying to restore. And not only that, we are making them sit for negotiations, but we are fundamentally looking at the negotiation dimension. We are also trying to restore the lifestyle of both of them. Because at the end of the day, what happens is, you see, when you look at any of these perpetrators, when they are released from your prisons, you see there is a kind of stigma. There's a kind of stigma that is attached to that individual. Will somebody take that individual into any employment? Yeah. Janajeevan Shravantilo kalavacha? Not possible, right? So we look at the rehabilitative dimension, we look at the restorative dimension, and that is what is considered as restorative justice, right? Please understand these dimensions. We have different forms of justice which are existing. Okay. Now, as part of this, write down the difference between procedure established by law and due process of law. Procedure established by law and due process of law, which is present in the Constitution. Both are not present, or one is present, one is not present? Decide, don't fight, decide. Which is present, my dear? Procedure established by law. Are we having due process of law in Constitution? Added. Oh, judiciary can add to Constitution. Then I said, please don't mix up things. Judiciary is the guardian of Constitution. It has the responsibility of protecting. And one tool of that is we see judicial review and basic structure doctrine. When I'm going to teach you judiciary, I will teach you those dimensions. Please be very clear. Don't mix up things. Can judiciary amend Constitution? Nothing is changed in Constitution by judiciary. Who is the interpreter of the Constitution? Supreme Court. Please be very clear with these principles. Who is the interpreter of the Constitution within the Parliament? Right? We'll discuss those differences. Okay. Write down. Likh lo. Difference. Likh lo. Right under procedure established by law. 2023 we had a question, no? On what? Due process. Okay. Write down. Law enacted by following the required procedures. Law enacted by following the required procedures. Right, next. Legislature can deprive the personal liberty of an individual. Can deprive the personal liberty of an individual by passing a law. by passing a law. All of these are under procedure established. Please write. Right. Next, derived from British. It is derived from British or Japanese, or you can say British or Japanese expression. British or Japanese expression. Next, courts can question. Courts can question the procedural irregularities. Courts can question the procedural irregularities. Next, on the side of due process of law, it checks the intent of the law. It checks the intent of the law. Next, it checks the laws depriving the personal liberty of an individual. It checks laws depriving the personal liberty of an individual. Next, it ensures law is fair and not arbitrary. It ensures law is fair and not arbitrary. Next, it's an American expression. It's an American expression. Next, court can question. Court can question the merit and the substance of the law. The merit and the substance of the law. Right? Things are very clear, but whatever I dictated, I think they are self-explanatory. In procedure established by law, it is only the focus with respect to the procedures. But when you look at the due process, it is not only with respect to procedures, but it also talks about the fair application of law. This was the option this year. In 2023, I think, if I'm not wrong, option C of that particular question, you see it is the fair application of law. Understanding it fundamentally talks about not only the procedure, but also the fairness of application. It talks about not only the procedure, but it also talks about the intent of the law. And in the context of procedure established by law, who is going to be dominant, my dear? Don't you think your legislators are going to be dominant here? Right? Because they can circumvent the personal liberty of an individual just by following the procedure of the law. But whereas when you look at due process, can they circumvent? No. Because in this, we see that courts will dominate the dimension, and courts will say that we can check and ensure whether the merit and substance of the law is being ensured or not. Are you understanding? Are you understanding this basic dimension? Okay. Right? There's one more dimension. We see that law can be two. One is either procedural law. The other one is substantive law. एक लाइन लिख लो यार इसके बारे में. Right? Substantive law. It is statutory in nature. It is statutory in nature. It determines the rights and obligations of the citizen. It determines the rights and obligations of the citizen to be protected by law. To be protected by law. On the side of procedural, on the side of procedural, it regulates. It regulates the procedures. It regulates the procedures and rules that govern the conduct of legal proceedings. It regulates the procedures and rules that govern the conduct of legal proceedings. Right? This is more of rules oriented. This is more of rights oriented. Please be very clear. This is more to do with the procedures, more to do with the rules. This is more of obligation. This is more of right oriented, rights, and more to do with what matter. It is statutory in nature. This is statutory in nature. Very clear, right? Because recently we had amendments with respect to CRPC, IPC. So in that context, we are just looking. IPC is what? Procedural or substantive? It is substantive law. IPC is substantive. Please be very clear, right? Okay. Next principle is what? Equality. Next principle is equality. Right? Right on. Constitution provides equality before law and equal protection of law. Constitution provides equality before law and equal protection of law. Next, it means all are entitled to same rights and opportunities. It means all are entitled to same rights and opportunities. Next, it provides equality of status and opportunity. It provides equality of status and opportunity. Next, it also implies absence of privileges. It also implies absence of privileges. It also implies absence of privileges. Now, when you look at this equality, it can be positive and negative. It can be positive and negative. In the context of positive, when you provide equal opportunities and equal status for the development of the individual, when you provide equal opportunities and equal status for the development of the individual, we call that as positive equality. And when you look at negative equality, it fundamentally indicates mere absence of privileges. Mere absence of privileges. I think in one of the year, if I'm not wrong, it was in 2017. There was a question on which of the following or what do you understand by equality? What is the meaning? There was one statement, absence of privileges. That is negative equality. Positive equality is what? You provide the status, opportunities, the equal dimension of resources which are provided such that there is an opportunity that is provided for the individual to grow, individual to realize his or her potential that is existing. That is what is meant by positive equality, right? Please be very clear here. Now, one dimension that you have with respect to this equality here, you have something called as doctrine of reasonable classification. You have something called as doctrine of reasonable classification. Write down. States can make laws operating differently. States can make laws operating differently on different classes of people. On different classes of people. Next, the classification is reasonable. The classification is reasonable if it is not arbitrary, if it is not arbitrary, and if it is based on a rational criteria, if it is based on a rational criteria, right? Don't you think classic example of this is reservation? You see, reservation happens to be what material? It's a manifestation of reasonable classification. Now, in that you have a rational criteria which is being present. For example, if you look at socially and educationally backward, economically weaker section. So, in that context, what is happening? You are having a rational and objective criteria which is present. And apart from that, you also see that it is not arbitrary. The application is not arbitrary. That means equals being treated equally. Equals being treated equally. Equal protection of law dimension. That means, can I say this is more of an affirmative action that is present? Affirmative action. Can I say it is more of positive discrimination? Can I say it is more of positive discrimination? Are you understand? Right? So this is with respect to this principles of equality. Okay. Then next, liberty. Liberty. Write down. Performing an action with responsibility. Performing an action with responsibility. Next, it is a freedom. It is a freedom for the people to choose their way of life. It is a freedom for the people to choose the way of life. In bracket, you write freedom with responsibility. Freedom with responsibility. And next point, absence of restraints. This was also one of the PYQs. Absence of restraints. Right? Again, in the context of liberty, we see there is positive liberty. There is Negative liberty. When you talk about negative liberty, it fundamentally indicates it is the absence of restraints. It fundamentally indicates the absence of restraints. But when you look at the positive liberty that is existing, when you look at the positive liberty, it talks about the providing the necessary opportunities, providing the necessary freedom such that the individual is ensuring the individual development. At the individual developmental dimension, providing an ecosystem, providing the conditions which are enabling for an individual to develop. That is what is a kind of positive liberty that is existing, right? That means you fundamentally focus on what matter. India is having positive liberty or negative liberty? Positive liberty. India definitely follows positive liberty. That it is not mere absence of restraints. If liberty is all about not mere absence of restraints, but it is about providing a conducive condition for the development of the individual. Are you getting this? Right? Now, before I move to the next philosophy, what do you mean by political equality? Huh? What do you mean by political equality? If all the people are able to talk about politics, is it political equality? Huh? Write down one line. Political equality. Enabling citizens to develop themselves. Enabling the citizens to develop themselves and participate in state affairs. And participate in state affairs. Next, social equality. Ensuring basic conditions of life, to all members of the society, Next, economic equality. Emphasis on equity and inclusion. Emphasis on equity and inclusion. That means it is talking about what? Inclusive growth. That when you look at societal equality, it talks about what? Equal access to education, health, nutrition, right? Now tell me one thing. If you ensure the inheritance rights for women, is it political equality, social equality, or economic equality? Social equality. Please be very clear. Right? Inheritance rights for women are under social equality. Right? Don't be confused with economic equality. No. The gender perspective is majorly societal in nature. Right? So it is social equality. Okay. Next. There's one more word that is present, that is fraternity. Fraternity ka kya hota hai? What is fraternity? Brotherhood. Are we having the word brotherhood in the constitution? Huh? How many say no? How many say yes? How many say there is no word called brotherhood in constitution? How many say yes? Baki janata? Don't know. Sir, you decide. कुछ भी कर लो यार. It is mentioned in where? Fundamental duties. Right? Fundamental duties. Right? That is to do with your fraternity. Now tell me one thing. Communalism is a challenge to secularism or fraternity. Hmm? Communalism is a challenge to fraternity or secularism. Huh? Both, my dear. Both. Right? The antidote for communalism is secularism. And why are we having communalism? When we have the absence of fraternity, when we don't have the feeling of brotherhood, it results in communalism, and communalism is acting as a challenge to secularism. So it is a challenge for both, right? Next, right? So these are different philosophies. Okay. Now write down general principle 2. The ethical principles, the ethical principles and the moral philosophy, the ethical principles and the moral philosophy is generally mentioned, is generally mentioned in preamble and fundamental duties of the Constitution. In preamble and fundamental duties of the Constitution. Was fundamental duties part of your original Constitution? No. Right? Please be very clear. Okay. Now next, rights. Just write down one line on this, rights. The legal and moral entitlements. The legal and moral entitlements or the claims of a person over an individual or society, over an individual or society or government. You see that rights will definitely exist among these three. One is either society. And when you talk about women rights, it is with respect to the individual. The individual dimension here is what? The male candidate of the society. When you look at the societal dimension, it is the patriarchal setup that is existing in the society. And if you look at governmental dimension, it is what, my dear? Representation of women in politics. Are you understanding this dimension? So it is a kind of claim. Okay. And when you look at, there are different types of rights. One is natural right, natural, human rights, civil rights, right? Civil rights, statutory rights, and fundamental rights. Right? I don't want one line on this. Natural rights. These are universal rights. These are universal rights. Inherent to every individual being. These are inherent to every individual being. Next, human rights. These are the rights one gets. These are the rights one gets by the virtue of being a human. By the virtue of being a human. Next, civil rights. Civil rights. These are the rights conferred by the law of the land. Law of the land. Law of the land. In bracket you write constitution or law. In bracket you write constitution or law. Statutory. These are the rights provided by law. These are the rights provided by law. Next, fundamental rights. Or before that, add one more, my dear, I forgot. Constitutional rights. Please add constitutional rights. Right. One line for constitutional right. These are rights enshrined in the Constitution. These are rights enshrined in the Constitution. Now write about fundamental rights. It is branch of civil rights. It is a branch of civil rights guaranteed and protected by Constitution. It is a branch of civil rights guaranteed and protected by Constitution. Is this clear? Right? If you want to simply put this, can I say that these are your natural rights? Yes. Can I say these are human rights? These are human rights. Yes or no? Yes. Can I say these are civilian rights? These are civilian rights. In this civilian rights, these are statutory. These are statutory because this statutory can exist even with human rights. If I want to make this diagram little simpler, I would restrict my relation between natural right and human right. And what I would do is, I would go for civilian rights separately. This relation I anyway know. But what is the relation here? This is for civilian rights. Now here when I talk about civilian rights, I know that constitutional rights are part of civilian rights. Your statutory rights are also part of civilian rights. Your fundamental rights are what? Part of Constitution. If I want to keep it a little simpler, right? I will not say this is the exact representation. What I am fundamentally saying is for easier understanding. For easier understanding. Right to property. Constitutional right. Right to vote. Constitutional right. Right to practice your own religion. Fundamental right. Right to contest elections. Statutory rights. Are you understanding? Is it clear? Right? That means, please be very, very clear because I think if it was in 2017, there was one question. There was one question with respect to right to vote. It is what? Constitutional right. Do not be confused, right? One more small chutkus application here. Whenever we talk about rights, we generally see there are two forms of application of rights. If I want to apply any right, I see two forms. One is either horizontal application. The other one is the vertical application of rights. When I look at the horizontal application, it has got to do with the private individuals. It has got to do with the private individuals. That means when you see it is between these two entities of a society, I call it as a horizontal application. And when I see it with the government, it is what? It is the vertical application of rights with the government or public entities. With the government or public entities, I see it as a vertical. This is vertical application, this is horizontal application. Hope you know what is vertical, what is horizontal. Dani would explain, right? Simplest way of understanding this. Are you getting this? Right? Vertical application of rights and horizontal applications of rights. Right? With this, we fundamentally finish the basic philosophy of the constitution. Because every year we see one question coming from these. Just as a concluding remark here, we see that there is a philosophy called constitutionalism. There's a philosophy called constitutionalism. I mean, look at this philosophy called constitutionalism. Just write down. Just write down. It means limited government. It means limited government. Constitutionalism means limited government. It also indicates constitutional supremacy. It also indicates constitutional supremacy. It also indicates constitutional rule or rule of the constitution or rule by the constitution. It also indicates upholding constitutional principles. Upholding constitutional principles. Right? Are you understanding this? All of these fundamentally imply constitutionalism as a philosophy. Are you getting this? Right? Can I say upholding fundamental rights is constitutionalism? No? Why no? ఎందుకు తల అడ్డంగా అవునా కదా? Why? Because don't you think we were seeing that fundamental rights are having a negative dimension? It creates limitations on the government. And what did I define? The first line of constitutionalism was what? Limited government. Samajra, are you understanding? Right? I think this year also we had this. What is the understanding of limited government? What is the understanding of limited government? Constitution is going to abide by, restrict the authority of that government. Who is restricting the authority? Will it regulate the functioning of the government? That's why I told you constitutional supremacy, the rule by the constitution. Right? This is what is the basic philosophy. Right? Because we are all here for prelims. Now tell me one thing, is prelims is easy or tough? Bolo. Zor se bolo. Easy. Easy or very easy? Very easy. For today it is only very easy, not dead easy. As we move across, it will become, Are, intena. When we look at prelims, the fundamental approach is we are all focusing on basics. And among these basics, the conceptual clarity. Among these basics, the conceptual clarity is what is going to be the first step in managing this exam. Because if you observe today's session, what have we done? All of this you know. But we slowly opened up the knots which have been fundamentally used by UPSC. And from today's session, definitely we will have one question. इसमें तो कुछ doubt है ही नहीं. Definitely. Because we are opening up the concepts and we are opening up the knots which are present with respect to the conceptual clarity. And what is going to happen is, on this basis, trust me, you're going to have at least 30 questions. On this basis of conceptual clarity of the basics, 30 questions to mil hi jayega. Out of those 100 questions, you will have this 30 questions base. But what is going to be present is, the game is going to be with 70 questions, because if you answer all of these 30 questions also, how much it is turning up to? 60 marks, which you are still short of 30 to 40 marks. Still you are short of 30 to 40 marks. Now, in this context of 70 questions, there the real game is going to be with respect to how well you are going to choose the questions. Because it is very, very clear that when we have this bunch of 100 questions, we are very, very sure that we are not going to attempt all 100. We are not going to attempt all 100. So then how many should we attempt? Slowly we will open up that dimension of this examination as well. We will open up that dimension of this examination. How many should we attempt and what is a rational approach to attempt? What is the criteria to decide how many should I attempt, how many should I not attempt? All of those dimensions we will anyway discuss. Now here, in this 100 questions, I know that these 30 questions I will answer, but out of these 70, I will have to choose. Now, what is the criteria for me to choose these questions among these 70? One criteria is known words. You will definitely see that in these 70 questions, some statements will have or will constitute some known words. You would feel, yes, I heard this word somewhere. I heard this word somewhere. You would have heard those set of words. Those questions you will have to emphasize first. Because what is going to happen is you can't randomly pick up a question which you are very, very new in the exam hall. That is going to hinder your balance. That is going to affect your time management in the examination. How are you going to choose this? First is known words, or sometimes known concepts. The first priority. The second priority that we see, how are we going to choose those questions among those 70, is with respect to the nature of the options that are present. We will see, or we will first prioritize if you are having multiple statements. The first priority is choosing a question with multiple statements. Sir, you're telling ulta. Why? For me, it is very clear. In any question which is having a single word answer or a single line answer, is very, very tough for me to choose if it is unknown concept. But if I look at multiple statements, UPSC will definitely give you an opportunity to eliminate one of these statements. Right? It will enable, or it will give you an opportunity to eliminate at least one. And in most of the times when you are eliminating one statement, we will arrive at the answer. You look at your statement 1, statement 2 wala questions also. Last year they asked about statement 1 and statement 2. And most of the questions, if you are able to eliminate one statement, you are able to arrive at the answer. Because one of the options of those is statement 1 is correct, statement 2 is incorrect. Statement 2 is correct, statement 1 is incorrect. That means when you are knowing that one statement is going to go wrong, one of the options is going to be either C or D. Are you understand? So first choice is going to be with respect to multiple statements. Then we come for the single options or the single statements. Priority. The next priority that we're going to see is wherever we can apply elimination techniques. Now you have to be very, very careful when you are using this, because we have some magicians in YouTube. Magicians, please be very clear. We have some magicians in YouTube. They will say, we will teach you elimination techniques. They will teach you, no doubt. But will they teach you the rationality behind that elimination? No. They will say, number, eliminate. Extreme, eliminate. Right? That, eliminate. You, eliminate. You get eliminated. And what happens finally? People come out of the exam hall and say eliminations got eliminated. Abba, మరి మేం వాడింది? Sir, what you used was black magic, sir, not elimination. Oh, I didn't know, my dear. You fundamentally have to understand that UPSC follows certain principles in prelims exam. And one such pattern arrangement, on the basis of the pattern arrangement, we are arriving at these elimination techniques. I'm calling them as MCQ solving techniques. Please be very clear. These are applicable in the exam hall, provided you know the logic behind why are you applying. When I'm teaching you PYQs, I would teach you these techniques not as a technique, but I would give you the logic behind why am I applying the technique. And slowly, after 4 or 5 sessions of eliminations or MCQ solving techniques, you will derive your own technique. Trust me. When I'm solving here, some person from there will say, sir, you can do like this. Are you understanding? Right? And last, guess. Means toss. Right? If it is heads, option A. If it is tails, option B. If nothing, if it is standing like this on the bench, then it is option C. Right? Then if it falls down off the bench, then it is option D, because none of the niche gir gaya na. Then if it goes and falls on the head of the examiner, something it is, then you have to leave the question, because examiner will snatch the paper and will chuck you out. Right? Or dice, best. One bud in anko. Option A. Or one statement correct. 2. Second statement correct. 3. Third statement correct. 4. All 4 correct. 5. None of the above. 6. Leave the question. Best. We have something called as intelligent guess. Intelligent guessing. Some people call it as intuition. I call it as intelligent guessing. What do you mean by intelligent guessing? Is learning the techniques of intelligent guessing is again an art which I will teach you in MCQ solving. Right? Do you remember? Which of the following is the largest producer of cobalt? I went for Congo. Why? Ko ikkada. Cocoa. Just on a lighter note. Right? Go back and look at the question called in 2021 R2 code practices. Right? I will teach you when I'm teaching you PYQs of environment. Now in R2 code practices, nobody knew this. But how are we going to arrive? Intelligent guessing. R2 means either this. Yes. And what we see is, or either some theme of a statement which is present should be starting with R. And when I look at the option A and B, those were the things which were present with respect to the theme of the statement starting with R. And usme option A was something which was related to recycling. And one more was related to Ramsar, if I'm not wrong. Option B was related to Ramsar and option A was related to recycling. So which is more logical? This I applied in the exam hall. I didn't do reverse engineering. Right? What I'm teaching you is what I applied in exam hall or reverse engineering? Exam hall. I have the advantage of being faculty one side, student one side. Please be very clear. Right? Because people think, sir, ఇవన్నీ మీరు బయటకు వచ్చి చెప్తున్నారు సార్. నేను లోపల చేసి బయటకు వచ్చి చెప్తాను. Please be very clear. Right? So you don't need to doubt these techniques. Don't worry. Is this clear? That is the priority. And if anything goes out of this basket, what you're supposed to do? Leave the nothing, nothing else. Is this clear? Right? Are you understanding? So this is the first GAN today. So I want you to go back and refer PYQs of 2011 till 2023. Right? We'll meet back tomorrow with